think we're still pretty low. Oh, there we are. Hi, everyone. Thanks for waiting for a couple of minutes while we got the meeting to launch. If someone could just drop a comment in the chat to let us know that you can hear us and see us, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, they've said yes to sound and video.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't talking to no one there. All right, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We've got a couple of slides to share with you, going through our concept designs for 4 Mile Run Drive. My name is Sheila Borker. I'm the project manager for the 4 Mile Run Complete Streets project. With me tonight is Jason Woodstrom. He manages the capital projects team at Arlington County and also understands a lot about the background of 4 Mile Run Valley and the area plan. So this is just kind of a preview of what we're going to go over tonight. I'll quickly touch base on the project timeline. I'm going to talk through some of the background information that helped us make decisions as we worked through these designs, and that's what I mean by project basis. Obviously, as you can imagine, a big part of that was the feedback that we received during our existing conditions outreach in June and July. So I'll give you a quick summary of what we heard there, and then I'll dive into our proposed concepts. We're going to be looking at them side by side, so you all can give us your comments and let us know your thoughts. So we are using the Q&A function of Teams to gather your feedback tonight. So if you look at I believe the top of your team screen, you should be able to see an icon that looks like a little speech bubble with a question mark in it. You can use that to submit your comments. I'll stop periodically after a couple of slides after I've explained either our project basis or an intersection or a block of our design at a time, and Jason will read those comments aloud and we'll respond to any questions that you all have. Of course, if you don't have comments tonight, but think of something later, or maybe you just want some more time to mull over the concepts and think about them a little bit more before you provide your feedback, we will have a feedback form open online starting tonight. That feedback form will be available until August 31st. And you can either access that by scanning this QR code here or by going to Arlington County's website and searching for 4 Mile Run Drive Complete Streets. The feedback form will be front and center on the project page. Of course, you're also welcome to reach out to me directly. My email address is on the bottom left of the screen. So we are currently working through interim improvements for the section of 4 Mile Run Drive between Nelson Street and Walter Reed Drive. The improvements that we're trying to put in come directly from the 4 Mile Run Valley area plan that was adopted in 2018. And this is also building upon the work that we did in front of Jenny Dean Park last year. Now, of course, back in June, we held a virtual public meeting to gather comments and get a better understanding of the existing issues on the corridor. I'm hoping some people who are on the call tonight were on that virtual meeting. We also had the feedback form and received outreach through a couple of other methods, which I'll go through. We took all of that feedback and used it to inform our concept designs. So that's where we are now. We have these more refined designs that are building upon the concepts that were presented in the area plan, but really trying to fine tune them into something that we can actually construct. We'll take your feedback tonight and over the next couple of weeks. And our expectation has always been to implement something in September. This is because the county is going through its annual maintenance repaving program. So just as part of routine maintenance, we're repaving a certain section of streets to improve pavement quality. And when the county does that, the Department of Transportation tries to use that as an opportunity to also install some safety improvements. Now, one thing I did want to note is that, like I said, we're presenting two concepts. One is more straightforward, and we feel pretty confident that we can go ahead and install it with repaving in September. The other, however, will require additional fine-tuning. It's going to require additional coordination with business owners along 4 Mile Run Drive. It's going to take some more time to really come up with something that we feel confident with. So if we decide to move forward with that concept, it's more likely that we'll actually install it in spring of next year and not in September. So that's just something to keep in mind once we get to those concepts. All right. I'm going to, I told you I wanted to give you some background on how we made our decisions when we were working on these designs. We really leaned heavily on national best practices, but also looked at other studies and plans that the county has developed in the previous couple of years. So in doing so, we pulled from guidance from the Federal Highway Administration that's going back to national best practices, also looked at guidance from some other national transportation groups. But really also drew from Arlington County's Master Transportation Plan. That transportation plan's policies were more refined in the 4 Mile Run Valley Area Plan. We took those policies and thought about how to apply them to the specific context of this one street. The section of 4 Mile Run Drive between Walter Reed and Shirlington Road was also the subject of a Vision Zero safety study. And I'll explain in a little bit more detail in a moment what this acronym HIN stands for High Injury Network means. Then lastly, as I said before, we are going to touch on the feedback that we heard. Of course, your input is really important to us, so I'll give you a quick summary of what we heard in June and July. So Arlington County's Master Transportation Plan lays out one overarching policy that heavily influenced how we approached the problems that we saw on 4 Mile Run Drive. And that is this overarching policy to balance the needs of all users. So what this means is when we're looking at how to redesign a street or how to install improvements on a street, we're not just thinking of how to improve the experience for drivers, but we're also looking at if someone wants to take the bus or if they want to walk down the street, how do we make it safer for them to do so? Essentially, how do we make it so that people have a choice on how they want to access a street? A big part of that is improving safety for everyone who uses roads in Arlington County. And one critical factor in doing so and improving traffic safety is managing vehicle speeds. In general, we know that if we lower vehicle speeds to the posted speed limit, there's less of a chance of crashes resulting in high injury. There's less of a chance of crashes at all. I'm going to touch on the parking and pedestrian elements when talking about the area plan, because like I said, when we were developing the area plan, we took what was in the County Master Transportation Plan and looked at how to apply it in an industrial area. So 4 Mile Run Drive is a little bit unique compared to some other projects in Arlington County because of its industrial nature. We know that there's a need to maintain access for trucks and other large vehicles that service the businesses along the street. So we kept that in mind as we were developing our concepts, while also looking at how to improve access and safety for other users. With Jenny Dean Park recently opening on the east end of the study area, we know that this area is going to continue to draw more and more visitors. Some of those visitors might be more vulnerable users like children or people with mobility issues. So when we were developing our concepts, we kept front and center, how do we make it safe for everyone to use the street? Looking at what was recommended in the area plan, the plan developed a very highly conceptual concept that looked at reconfiguring the roadway down from 2 lanes in each direction to 3. So that means 1 lane in each direction with a center turn lane. This does two things for us. First, it gives us more physical space on the roadway to be able to implement other safety improvements, but it also helps us calm traffic, meaning that it more naturally makes the roadway feel like it's a place where you don't want to drive above the speed limit, so it naturally lowers driving speeds. The plan also placed a heavy emphasis on improving crosswalks and intersections and improving existing curb ramps. And this is partially to improve access, but also because we know intersections are where more severe traffic crashes tend to happen. So by improving safety at intersections, we're significantly reducing the chance of people being injured in crashes. The plan also placed an emphasis on accommodating improved transit, improving bus stops. I did want to note that because we're really focusing on interim conditions here, we're looking at how to put in safety improvements just with between the existing curbs without any extensive concrete work. We're pretty limited in what sort of transit improvements we can do here. But we will more likely be focusing on transit improvements when we look at our long-term designs over the next couple of years. And then, of course, this area has a high demand for on-street parking. So as we were developing our concepts, we thought about how to try to maximize on-street parking while also balancing that with the need to maintain traffic circulation and improve safety. Right, so I mentioned that I was going to explain a little bit more what a high injury network means. The section of 4 Mile Run Drive between Walter Reed Drive and Shirlington Road was on the high injury network, and that means that compared to other roads in Arlington County, there's a relatively high rate of severe injury crashes on this stretch. So a couple of years ago, our traffic team did a more extensive safety study on this part of 4 Mile Run Drive. And when they did that, they collected traffic data, including traffic volumes and speed data. This was really useful to us because it put hard data to some of the feedback that we heard and gave us more information to base our designs off of. Two things that I want to point out here. One is that pre-COVID, so when volumes were a little bit higher than what we would expect to see now, there were approximately 12,000 to 13,500 vehicles on this part of 4 Mile Run Drive every day. According to the Federal Highway Administration and kind of what we see nationally, these volumes are actually relatively low compared to what you would expect to see on a roadway with 2 lanes in each direction. So based on these volumes alone, we expect that reconfiguring the road to what's presented in the area plan should be relatively easy with just some minor tweaks to intersections or signal timing. What I found more interesting in the data from the Vision Zero study was actually the speed data that we collected. So in transportation design, there's this benchmark that we call the 85th percentile speed, and on 4 Mile Run Drive, on this section, that speed was 41 miles per hour. What this means is that 15% of everyone who drives on 4 Mile Run Drive is going above 41 miles per hour. The posted speed limit on this part of the street is 30 miles per hour. So 15% of the people who drive down it are going over 11 miles per hour above the posted speed limit. And I think the more important thing to note here is that if someone gets into a crash going above 40 miles per hour, there's a significantly higher chance of injuring someone in that crash, especially if they hit a pedestrian, than if they were going 30 miles per hour. So we know that reducing speeds down to the posted speed limit is going to be critical to improving safety outcomes. I'm going to quickly talk about some of the feedback that we received in June and July, but I did want to note that, in the interest of time, I'm kind of moving quickly through some of this feedback, but we will be posting a more extensive summary of what we heard online. So I'll make sure to include a link to that when we put these slides on the project website. We took a multi-pronged approach to gathering feedback from you all. I've already mentioned that we had our virtual public meeting in June, and we had 15 participants at that, not including county staff. We also kept an online feedback form open for 2 weeks after the virtual public meeting. In addition to these 2 online forms of feedback, the project team actually went out onto the site one afternoon to speak to employees and managers at local businesses. We went door to door and spoke to people where we could. And when we were out there, we managed to speak to about 13 groups of people at local businesses. We couldn't reach everyone, or some people were too busy to talk to us or didn't have immediate feedback. So when that was the case, we left flyers with my contact information and a link to the feedback form. That same afternoon, when we were out there, we also stopped people as they were approaching Jenny Dean Park or along the W&OD trail to get feedback from people who frequent this roadway just as a user. So when we were out there doing that small pop-up for pedestrians and trail users and other roadway users, we spoke to 32 people. And in addition to all of this, a few people reached out to me individually requesting phone calls to go over their concerns more in depth. And I spoke to 3 people that way. So across all of these types of outreach, a couple of major themes emerged that I'll be going into in a little bit more detail. According to our feedback form, the highest percentage of people ranked intersection and crossing safety as their first priority on this corridor. Something that I found really interesting when we were in the field and talking to people face to face was that this concern about intersection and crosswalk safety came from pretty much everyone who used 4 Mile Run Drive. We heard from drivers, especially drivers who park on the north side of the street. We heard from pedestrians, and we heard from people who say that they most typically use the bus, that they don't feel safe crossing 4 Mile Run Drive. A few people elaborated and said that they feel like drivers zoom down 4 Mile Run Drive and don't look for people in the crosswalks, or they don't look to see if someone is waiting to cross. If there is someone in the crosswalk, they might not necessarily yield to them, so people feel unsafe using the crosswalks. A couple of other people also pointed out that sometimes they feel unsafe crossing at intersections because they feel like the sight lines aren't good. So sometimes drivers park too close to the intersections and block sight lines from oncoming traffic. From people who typically walk on 4 Mile Run Drive, we had a couple of folks say that they feel like they have to actually step into traffic to be able to see oncoming vehicles. The next priority that was ranked in our feedback form was improving sidewalk conditions on the south side. So while there is the trail on the north side of 4 Mile Run Drive, all of the businesses and amenities that people are trying to access are on the south side. And we heard a lot of complaints about how inconsistent that sidewalk was, or how dangerous it felt to walk on. The block between Oakland and Oxford Streets in particular was called out as a confusing or dangerous place. We had a couple of people say that they would rather cross the street twice than try to navigate that block. It seems like the sidewalk disappears or it's parked over by cars frequently. We also had a couple of people say that they felt like cars moving in and out of the driveways, and there are many driveways on this part of 4 Mile Run Drive, felt particularly unsafe. I noted earlier that one somewhat unique thing about this project in particular is that it is an industrial corridor. So we know that we need to keep that in mind as we move forward with our improvements. Maintaining access to businesses and maintaining vehicle circulation to building frontages is going to be really critical, and we heard that from several people as well. And then, of course, several folks told us about a desire to see more on-street parking available on 4 Mile Run Drive. But in addition to people asking us about the number of parking spaces, we also had a few people express frustration with vehicles that park in the parking lanes long term when some of those spaces are really meant for shorter term parking. I'm going to pause here to see if we have any comments from folks. but then I'll move on to going through our concept design.
So Sheila, we do have one question in the chat, and I think we're going to get there. The question is can you show the proposed design changes? And as you can see on the screen here.
Yeah, as you can see, we're just about to dive into those, and hopefully we can spend most of our time talking about these.
We can hold for, let's say, 30 seconds and see if there's any others, since you had asked.
And I think I mentioned this, but if folks have questions about the existing conditions, feedback, we'll be posting a more extensive summary online. I'm also going to include links to some of the other resources I mentioned. So the Vision Zero Safety Study will include a link to that in the last slide in this presentation.
Okay, I haven't seen any new questions pop up, so
okay,
I'm
gonna keep rolling. All right, so just to recap and really set the stage for what we were trying to address with these concepts, these were the goals that we kept in mind as we refined and developed our designs. So as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to improve intersection and crosswalk safety, provide a consistent walking zone on the south side, and maximize the number of parking spaces. All of those were directly pulled from the area plan. We're also trying to maintain access to businesses and amenities on the south side. I'm going to show our two proposed concepts side by side in just a minute, and I'll be moving through them by intersection and block. You'll notice that they have a lot in common visually. Both designs show the roadway being reconfigured to a 3-lane roadway, and we're showing a designated walking zone on the south side. Again, both of those elements are pulled directly from the area plan. We're also proposing a mix of parallel parking and back and angled parking, and I'll explain why once we move through the images. The major difference between our two concepts is that in one, we're designating the walking zone only with pavement marking striping, whereas in the other, we're reinforcing and providing a physical barrier between the walkway and the vehicle lane with jersey barriers and bollards. In concept one, where we're just using those pavement marking striping, we're also maintaining the existing widths of all driveways and curb cuts as they are right now. And because this has less of an impact on how vehicle circulation moves along 4 Mile Run Drive, we're pretty confident that this can be implemented in September. So that's going back to what I was saying when we talked about our project timeline. Concept two, the jersey barriers and bollards are going to change how the street feels more intensely. We're also proposing narrowing some driveways and curb cuts to be closer in line with what county standard is today, which is 20 to 30 feet. We know that this is going to require additional conversation with employees and business owners, and it's going to take a little bit more thought to figure out how to maintain access for trucks, how to maintain access for other people who need to access business frontages. So we know that we're going to need to spend a little bit more time on that design, and because of that, we don't think that we would be able to install concept two until spring of next year. So we'll start with the Walter Reed Drive intersection. As I move through each section, I'm going to show 3 slides. So one just shows the concepts 1 and 2 on their own without any annotation. I'll show a slide that calls out what they have in common, and then another slide that kind of highlights the differences between the two, and then we'll pause for discussion. So at the Walter Reed Drive intersection, we're not making any, we're not repaving the intersection itself or anything to the west of the intersection, but we still needed to figure out how to transition between 2 vehicle lanes going eastbound down into just 1 lane on in our project area. So I asked our traffic team to take a look at the way this intersection operates. And we found that if we changed one of the 3 lanes on the west side to a right turn only lane and made some small changes to the signal timing, they looked at how this intersection operates during rush hour, and they found that if we just make a couple of tweaks to the signal, it'll continue to operate as it does now after we implement these changes. Going westbound, we do need another through lane. So we are including a second lane for about 350 feet. You'll see in the next section that after that 350 feet, that second lane turns into a parking lane. But per our analysis, we think that that 350 feet will provide enough space to get people through the intersection. And now you can begin to see kind of how the Jersey barriers and bollards are going to change the way that people experience these two concepts. So in concept 1, we were particularly concerned about how drivers turning off of Walter Reed onto 4 Mile Run Drive were going to know that they can no longer turn into a lane that's right up against the curb. So to direct them into the vehicle lane and have them not turn into the walkway, we're using some lane striping to lead them into what's now 1 lane going eastbound. I did want to mention that our design engineers modeled what a truck turning movement would look like at this intersection, and that's how we came up with the location and the curve of this lane line. In concept 2, we're following the same curve and the same pavement marking striping, but we are reinforcing and providing a physical barrier between people walking and people driving with Jersey barriers and bollards. So those barriers will just add additional protection to the walkway on the south side. Right, I'm going to pause here and take comments.
All right, yes, so we did get one comment. It was sent it as private, so it doesn't allow me to publish it, but the question is are you going to add a left turn arrow for the westbound side? And I assume that is on the signal head. Would there be a dedicated left?
I think we'll have to talk to our traffic team about what that would look like, how quickly we would be able to implement it. I'm more worried about changes to kind of the number of phases of the traffic signal than just adding the arrow. But that's something that we can ask them about.
All right. We have another question. I'll publish it here. And the question is, in concept 1, seems like it would create a high risk of drivers entering the pedestrian area, especially if it's night or they're driving poorly, may not feel safe, and people may not want to use it. Concept 2 seems to be much safer.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment. I think one thing that we're weighing here when we think about concept 1 versus concept 2 is that they're both showing a walkway on the south side. I think if we did move forward with concept 1, we could certainly build upon it before we get to that longer term vision of actually moving the curb out. Especially at intersections, maybe it makes more sense to add flex posts or bollards on top of what's currently shown in concept 1. We can certainly monitor it and go back and tweak it. I think the real question is whether it provides enough of a safety benefit as concept 1 is shown now to justify implementing it in September, or whether we want to wait and come up with a concept where we would be able to add a protected, a physical barrier or physical protection like we're showing in concept 2. It would just have to be implemented later.
All right, we just received another question from Tom's Auto Stop. And it says, or asks, we often see cars waiting to pull into a business or parking lot with 1 lane configuration. Would that block traffic? Has this been taken into consideration?
Well, I will say we developed this one lane in each direction concept, just looking at traffic volumes, and we do have cameras along this part of 4 Mile Run Drive, so we have the ability to monitor it. I think the nice thing about this being an interim condition is that if it doesn't work, we can go back and tweak it, right? So we have the ability to monitor it in the future. We also have the ability, if you think that there's something that we can do at business access points, to maybe modify the design in certain locations. But it's something that we can keep an eye on and collect data on after implementation.
Yeah, I'll just add to your response, Sheila, is that the numbers that were mentioned earlier in the pre-COVID traffic, those are lower than, those are during the peak hour, I should say, and those are lower than what is typically the limit of one lane in each direction by about, I think, 20%, which may not seem like a lot, but it's like 100 cars or 200 cars in the hour. And so that should leave space for people to make turns and gaps for people to get in and out. But as like Sheila mentioned, if this is something that is just absolutely not working, we can revisit and in a sense restripe. Okay, another question. Actually, this is just a comment. It says, if we've learned anything from bike lanes in Arlington, it's if you don't physically prevent drivers from parking along the curb, they just will. Concept 1 would be a de facto parking area on the south side.
And I think that was definitely a concern that we had as well. And that reminds me, one thing I didn't point out with concept 2 is that in addition to the Jersey barriers outside of the walking zone, we're also proposing smaller bollards on either side of the driveway. And that's to make sure that people turning out of the driveways don't turn into the walkway. I think with 4 Mile Run Drive in particular being an area where, again, we got a lot of feedback saying that there's a demand for parking here. I totally hear your concern that people might use an unprotected walkway as a parking lane.
Okay, we have another question. It is it possible to implement concept 1 now and then come back and implement concept 2 next year, or do you have to make a choice now and stick with it?
There's I think I mentioned this earlier, but there's definitely we definitely have the ability to put in concept 1 now and kind of add to it as we have the ability to monitor how people behave after this reconfiguration, especially at intersections or other specific areas where we have more safety concerns. I think in the future we'll have the ability to add on top of the pavement markings.
All right, we have another comment that maybe you could speak to. It says, with the number of vehicles turning in and out, it seems like the barriers in concept 2 would hinder the ability of drivers to clearly see pedestrians.
So the Jersey barriers that we would be using would be low enough that pedestrians would be visible above them.
All right, we have another comment here. It says, if you have all of the eastbound through traffic in one lane and no left turn arrow for westbound traffic during higher traffic flow, nobody will ever be able to make the westbound left turn. I think this goes back to the comment earlier about the dedicated left onto Walter Reed. So I think that's something that, we've certainly heard your comment and we'll take a look at with our signal group.
I also wanted to mention, partially in response to that comment, that You know, you can see here that the intersection itself isn't included in our project area right now, but it is something that we're going to be taking a closer look at in the future. So we'll have the ability to make more changes to Walter Reed in the future. It's going to take more engineering and more study.
Okay, we have another comment. It says in concept 2, the narrower accesses would not provide sufficient vehicle access.
And that's, I think, we certainly hear that comment. I think we would work with businesses along the south side to maybe modify what we're showing in concept 2, work with our engineers to make sure that we'd still be providing vehicle access and providing truck access with whatever goes into the ground. I think there's a potential that we would modify circulation patterns. So maybe the way that people access business frontages would look a little bit different compared to how they access them now. But our intent is to maintain access.
All right, we have another question. It's actually 2 parts, or two subjects. The first is about the PCI grading of 4 Mile Run Drive. It says, according to the report, the road is blue and green, which is good too, and then it stops. Do you have any background knowledge of the PCI and how it ranks against other roads, Sheila?
I do not off the top of my head, unfortunately. I will, however, so again, at the last slide of this presentation, we'll have links to other resources, and one of those links will be to the county's general resurfacing program. I'm assuming that whoever left this comment took a look at that and looked at the PCI grading map. That's something that's a question that I can take back to some other county staff.
Yeah, and what we typically do with the public comment that we get through this process and the emails is we do a summary, and so we can get back through that means, or if you can email directly to Sheila with your address, you know, we could follow up on a very specific question like that. The second question that was brought up here is, why is the WOD trail on the same span considered for pedestrian traffic?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding this question, but I'm assuming that this question is asking why isn't the trail considered appropriate access for pedestrian traffic? If that is what the question is asking, we feel like it's still important to provide pedestrian access on the south side of the street because that's where all the businesses and parks and, you know, the dog park, the places where people are trying to actually access are located. So instead of having them walk on the trail and cross 4 Mile Run Drive, and, you know, there's not, at some of the crosswalks, I think there isn't an accessible path from the trail to the crosswalk between Walter Reed and Shirlington. We want to create a space where people could walk on the south side directly in front of the places where they're trying to go.
Yeah, and you know, there is such a facility that exists today. It's just so poorly blocked and broken and driven over and parked on that it is inaccessible for most people. And that was something that was also, you know, highlighted. We can see it on the ground, we realize that, but it was also highlighted by those that were interviewed and through that existing condition. So there is interest in walking in this space. It's just in its current state, very difficult to do so. And so, you know, having this facility on the south side in the asphalt is an interim condition for maybe a future relocation of that curb and gutter to create a dedicated sidewalk that doesn't conflict with some of these other uses. And we also have one more question And the question is, what is PCI?
PCI, I don't remember exactly what the acronym stands for. I think it's Pavement Cement Index, but essentially it rates the quality of the asphalt. So roadways where the asphalt is crumbling or there are big cracks will have a lower PCI rating, and that indicates basically every year or so the county has an inspector come through and rate the pavement quality of our roads, and the roads with a lower PCI rating are placed on the repaving list for a fresh layer of asphalt.
Yeah, and the idea behind it is it is a national kind of standardized way to look at asphalt. And what the goal of that program is to look at asphalt objectively, to monitor, or not to monitor, to kind of prioritize where you would spend limited paving dollars. You know, our county and other cities around here, what they do is they allocate certain set of money each year to pave streets. And so if somebody said, here's $2 million, replace asphalt, we have the PCI, we can go with the lowest rating, and those are the ones that get the paving, and then, you know, repeat. And the idea is that you would cycle through but that there's enough money in that pot that you would cycle through all the roads in a reasonable way, you know, over the decades. All right, we have a new question. It says, what is the driveway access point or points into the BP station on the southeast corner from 4 Mile Run eastbound? Currently, there are 2.
Right, so the 2 access points at the BP station are kind of where I'm hovering my cursor right now, and there's also an access station from Walter Reed Drive going northbound. So, you know, we're maintaining those access points. We're just modifying them in concept 2.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh. And then we have not a question, but a comment. I think this is related to what I mentioned earlier about the existing facility and the need for the new one. This person says, agree, there needs to be a sidewalk on the south side. Weaving between cars as a pedestrian isn't safe. Many blind spots.
Yeah, that's exactly the condition that we're trying to address with these concepts. So I appreciate you leaving that comment. Okay, so we don't have any other comments or questions. So I'm going to move on to the next section. Again, if you think of comments or questions after this presentation, we'll have the feedback form online, and I'll also provide my contact information. So next, we're going to be looking at the block between Walter Reed and Oxford. I mentioned that east of the intersection, about 350 feet east of the Walter Reed intersection, we're dropping that second lane and turning it into a parallel parking lane. We did design this parallel parking lane to be wide enough for larger vehicles and trucks to be able to comfortably use. We're also using pavement markings and bollards to kind of begin to mock up a median refuge island at Oxford Street. So it provides pedestrians a space to wait and look for a gap in westbound traffic after crossing the eastbound traffic. Longer term, we'll, you know, once we get additional funding and do additional engineering, we'll be able to hopefully install a raised median refuge island there, but right now we can still provide some physical protection with these quick build methods. And then you'll see here that there's an existing bump out on the south side of Oxford Street. That bump out is used as a bus stop. So to get people off of our painted asphalt walkway and up onto the curb so that they can load buses from that bump out, we're going to be constructing a temporary asphalt curb or curb ramp. And the intention there is to replace it with a more permanent solution once we develop our long-term vision. And because this is kind of a larger block from our concepts, you can get a better sense of how we would be changing and narrowing curb cuts. The county standard for commercial driveways right now, I believe, is 30 feet wide. However, you know, if we move forward with concept 2, we would be working with business owners and getting a better sense of how some of these access points are currently used. We have the ability to model turning movements from trucks and other vehicles that use these roads. So there's certainly room to modify what we're showing here while still providing some protection in concept 2. Before we launch into discussion, I did just want to quickly note that initially, you know, we worked through a lot of concepts that we aren't presenting tonight because we decided that it wasn't really addressing our safety concerns or other concerns. One concept that we looked at showed back-end parking on this section of 4 Mile Run Drive purely to increase the number of parking spaces. But based on a lot of the feedback that we heard and remembering that this is an industrial area and that there's a need to provide for trucks and larger vehicles, we decided to move forward with parallel parking in both concepts here. If there is interest in having back and angled parking just to increase the number of spaces, that's a concept that we can speak more about. But for now, we think we want to move forward with parallel parking in either concept.
Okay, Sheila, we did get a question on the slide. If you're ready to take questions on this. Okay. It says, actually, this is a comment. So it says we have tractor trailers coming in and out from both directions, not to mention our own trucks and garbage recycling coming in and out of 3870. There is no way the hardscape will allow the radius needed.
Just to reiterate, if we move forward with concept 2, I think we would be reaching out to businesses and taking a closer look at how some of these narrow driveways would function. Really, our intent with narrowing the curb cuts and driveways was just reducing the surface area where crashes are more likely, right? Their turning vehicles would be conflicting with oncoming traffic or with pedestrians in the walkway. But we can fine tune what we're showing here instead of just saying a blanket 20 or 30 feet driveway to make sure that it still functions well for trucks or garbage trucks or whatever, you know, whoever needs to access these driveways. Sorry, I was I think I was going to steal your thunder, Jason. I was just going to read one of the questions that came in. So someone is asking how wide the walking area is. In both of our concepts, we are showing a 9-foot walking area. And that is to provide a little bit of shy distance from the existing curb and to provide space for people to walk side by side.
All right, we have another question that has come in. It says Arlington Crash Analysis registered 5 accidents since it started collecting data. That is 1% of total accidents in the county. Does the data suggest we have an abnormal issue?
So I think 2 things in response to that question. I think one, you know, our traffic engineers do say that this is a part of Arlington with a higher rate of crashes than normal. And not just a higher rate of crashes. If you look, if you go online and look at our crash maps, there are a lot of crashes that happen on the south side of the street, but there's also a high incidence of crashes that lead to severe injuries at Walter Reed and Shirlington. So it's really focusing on how to bring down the number of crashes that lead to injuries. But we also know that some of the other data that we're seeing on this road, like the high speeds, even if they don't result in crashes that get recorded, they're likely to lead to a lot of near misses, or the physical environment is creating the sort of environment where we would essentially where we would expect safety concerns, or we would expect unsafe behavior. So we're trying to reduce the number of crashes and also create conditions where they're less likely to happen.
All right, we have a comment. It's saying concept 2 seems like a good compromise. Retaining access for large vehicles while working to prevent them from running over kids on their way to the park. A more safety-focused, I assume, approach would be more severely limited driveway access. And then we also have a request. Please clarify which direction are these diagrams pointed towards, Walter Reed or Shirlington Road? I think turning these diagrams around would make a better visual depiction.
So to answer that question, Walter Reed is to the left of the concepts as we're showing them on the screen, and then Shirlington Road is to the right. So if you're looking at a map, or if you were to look at a map right now, north is up as we're showing it on the screen.
All right, we have a question. It says is asking how many parking spots will be lost on the south side of this section?
So I'm glad someone asked that, because that was something that I meant to cover earlier. So you'll notice that we're taking out the parking lane on the south side of the street, and that was really to address a safety concern that kept recurring in the outreach that we did, and also just from our own fieldwork and looking at the street. We had a lot of people say that folks park too close to the driveways or too close to the intersection, and that makes it really difficult to see oncoming traffic. And when we looked at how far back we would have to pull that parking lane to be able to provide enough of a sight line for oncoming traffic, we were already removing so many parking spaces that, I think every once in a while there was enough space for 1 or 2 parking spaces, but I would say we were taking away over 50% of the parking spaces on the south side. So we decided to just remove that parking lane on the south side, use that space for something else. But once we move on to the next part of this concept, so move on to the block between Oxford and Oakland, we did want to make sure that we were maintaining the number of parking spaces, or again, doing what we could to maximize the number of parking spaces. So to balance that number, we used back-end angled parking on the next block. And again, that was really to try to make sure that we were keeping up the number of parking spaces while still addressing safety concerns.
Well, there are new questions, and maybe this is a good transition to the next block.
Yep. All right. So again, this block was called out pretty frequently in our existing conditions outreach as being one where pedestrians especially felt really unsafe navigating the south side of the street. It's also getting a little bit closer to some of the amenities where you might expect people to be trying to access by walking. So I mentioned, I already talked about that back-end angled parking and why we're including that instead of keeping parallel parking on the south side of the street. By using back-end angled parking instead of keeping the parallel parking lane, we were able to maintain the number of parking spaces. I think with the concepts that we're showing tonight, we're actually increasing the number of spaces by 1. If we were to keep parallel parking on both blocks of our study area, we, kind of intuitively, right, we would be cutting back the number of parking spaces almost by half. That said, we did think it was important to use a mix of parallel parking and these back-end spaces to balance keeping the number of spaces with also providing some parking spaces for larger vehicles. One other thing to note is that There is an existing bus stop on the north side on Oxford Street as well. So as we get close to that bus stop and the concrete pad, the back end angled parking kind of gives way into a zone where buses can pull out against where pedestrians or where bus riders would be waiting to board the bus. Again, I think this block is going to be where it's most critical to provide a safe walking zone for pedestrians. The existing, where there is existing sidewalk, it's frequently parked over by cars, or it's paved over with asphalt. It disappears in sections. So we wanted to make sure that we provided this painted walkway on this block in particular. In concept 2, you can see that we're looking at narrowing some of these driveways just to reduce the surface area where people might be hit by cars, or where cars on 4 Mile Run Drive would have to anticipate people turning out of driveways. There's certainly room to work with businesses and either change these driveways as we're showing them, or potentially even restripe frontages and think about how to still maintain access to the buildings along this block. And then also in concept 2, at the intersection, we needed a way to transition people from being on the on-road walkway to the raised sidewalk to the east of this block. So we're protecting that transition over to the crosswalk with jersey barriers just at the corner. All right, I'm going to stop here. I see we've got some comments and questions.
Okay. This question is, if cars are parked on the north side, how do pedestrians cross 4 Mile Run? Do they have to double back to Oxford? I envision a lot of jaywalking.
So by pedestrians, I'm assuming you mean people getting out of the cars and then walking. I think the expectation would be that they walk to the nearest crosswalk and then cross. People are probably still going to jaywalk, unfortunately, but at least having that lane reduction that encourages people to drive more slowly will make it safer for people who are parking on the north side as well.
Sheila, how long is the block?
I do not know. I can take that measurement quickly in my other screen, or we could provide that information later.
Well, I'll do it very quickly, and the reason I ask is that we do know that pedestrians will likely not walk more than 250 feet. And so if someone were to park in the middle, right, that would be just over 375 feet. So I think with that in mind, I think there may be an opportunity now or in the future to have a mid-block crossing. We would be concerned about speeds at this point for a mid-block crossing, especially with having 4 lanes. We would not want to do that. But down to 2 lanes, 1 in each direction, I think that's a possible solution if we can get an appropriate landing on both sides of the road. So that's something for us to look at. All right, we have another question here. It says, will these be metered parking spaces?
We have not currently been discussing having them be metered, but that's something that we can raise with our parking and parking enforcement groups.
I would be curious to hear from the public, or maybe the person who answered that question, you know, is there support for metered spots? Here, you know, the reason you would do that is you want turnover. Yeah. It's not about the revenue generated. So that's why you would typically see the metering in areas where it's like restaurants and smaller businesses, so that, you know, they're not clogging up all the spots. But given how this is used today, I don't quite know that we would seek to do that. I see a follow-up on that. I'll publish it here. It says, if not metered, they will be used for semi-permanent parking by some of the businesses, at least overnight. So, yeah, I do think how this is signed, you know, for parking is something that we need to look into, if it's going to be a difference from what it is today or not. On this topic, somebody has commented that do not have metered spots. It means people will park in the residential area. All right. Looks like we have a comment here. It says concept 2 is better. It would be even better if the walkway were a raised sidewalk. Concept 1 seems dangerous and many people would not feel safe using it, especially at night.
To touch on that quickly, the long-term vision is absolutely to shift the curb and build a raised crosswalk. We just don't have the funding and would need to spend more time doing the engineering of the sidewalk. But we still want to put in safety improvements in the short term as well. So that's why we're looking at this on-street walkway.
All right, we have another comment. It says that, I think this is related to the jaywalking earlier. It says same issue between Nelson and Shirlington. Lots of jaywalking with children since Jenny Dean opened. I do recall, since I worked on that project, that we looked at the possibility of doing a mid-block crossing. It was ultimately decided at that time it was unsafe, but I think that, again, like I mentioned just a moment ago, is something that we can take a look at with the analysis that we do after the fact, when these are implemented, to make sure that they're doing what they need to do. In this case, reduction of speed. So again, we can take a look at that. All right, we have a question. It says, is there another area of the county that has these bollards that we could look at?
I'm assuming that you're asking about the Jersey barriers in particular, and off the top of my head, I can't think of a specific street where we've used this treatment. It was recommended by our, some engineers who have been with the county for a long time, so I can maybe add follow-up images in the last couple of slides when we put this online. There are sections where we've used other treatments, such as lower curb stops and flex posts to build a walkway. One example that comes to mind is on Lorcum Lane. I would have some concerns about using kind of a softer approach like that on 4 Mile Run Drive, just because of the high speeds that we're seeing. And part of the reason we're looking at a vertical physical barrier is to have more of a visual narrowing of the roadway to encourage people to drive more slowly. So yeah, I'll look for reference images and other locations and follow up with that.
Yeah, there is currently a temporary measure that is in place for the work that Dominion is doing down at the water treatment plant near the intersection of South Glebe and Route 1. right now, the trail in that area is detoured onto Glebe Road, and basically what the county has requested and Dominion has done is, in concert with VDOT's approval, because Glebe is VDOT controlled, is they've taken away a lane from Eads to Route 1 and kind of walled it off with Jersey barriers with 2 breaks in it to allow for operations with the WMATA and I think it's a Porsche dealership and their trash pickup. If that's what we're looking at, Sheila, in terms of like Jersey barriers or something kind of pretty rigid, I think that would be a good example that's on the ground right now. All right, so this is on the issue of the parking, and this is a comment. It says another possibility other than metering would be to issue permits for residents, maybe with a fee, and allow anyone else to park for a limited time, maybe 2 to 4 hours. So I think that is in line with some of our residential parking programs. So I think that is potential on the table. All right, it says the spots on the north side are currently 24-hour parking. That is necessary to address the needs of the residents and businesses. So I appreciate the comment. And we understand the need to keep the parking here and not to bleed over into the residential area. So thank you. All right, here's a question. Is the block between Shirlington and Oxford approximately the same distance as between Oxford and Oakland?
Yeah. That's another measurement that I don't have off the top of my head, and unfortunately I don't have Street View open in front of me.
Here, I will check it right now.
All right.
So,
and then the same person had a follow-up comment. He said, if so, same issues with jaywalking.
Yeah, so the section from Shirlington to Nelson is about 50 feet longer. And if you were going to go Shirlington to Oakland, it would be about 1,100 feet. So I think this section from Nelson to Shirlington, as I mentioned earlier, we did look at that as an option that fell out as part of the design. And it's something that we could go back and look at with fresh counts with the speeds and the volume. All right, a question. Wouldn't the reduction in lane per your study reduce speed and render the bollards unnecessary?
Well, I think part of the concern there is that, as someone mentioned earlier, without having physical bollards or a physical barrier, people might still be tempted to use the curbside lane as a parking lane, but also without any sort of raised vertical object in the buffer zone between the walkway and the travel lane, it's still creating an environment that it doesn't have any visual obstructions. It doesn't have anything that causes drivers to be more alert. And I think that having that open roadway without, again, a physical object, taking it down to one lane in each direction with just paint might do something to reduce speeds, but it's that speed reduction, I think, is better reinforced with a physical object.
All right, thank you. This is a comment. I hit publish. Is it going out? Seems stuck for some reason.
I think
but anyways,
if you read the comment out loud, Jason, we couldn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says, how hideous to have concrete barriers down the roadway. It closes off the community too.
Well, you know, we certainly wouldn't want to have those barriers up long term. The long-term vision is to replace them with actually moving the curb out and building a sidewalk and kind of building concrete in front of where we have, or on top of where we have this painted walkway right now. We could also look at other solutions, either look at different colors of concrete barriers, or potentially look at other objects we could use. My concern there would be the cost of other objects and making sure that they still provide the same safety benefit as these barriers.
Yeah, just to echo what you had said, is that this is envisioned as a temporary or an interim measure to see if the lane reduction and the painted parking spots and the crosswalks would all work from a transportation safety aspect, as well as just movements, and would give us some time to analyze it to make sure that this is appropriate and that the community is happy with some of that function. If indeed that were the case, then we would come back and spend serious capital dollars on this. Right now, we're not planning to spend a tremendous amount of money. I mean, there's a fair amount of cost in milling the road down and overlaying as part of our normal pavement management. But striping is really cheap to do in the grand scheme of things. So if we can mark this out with striping and to a condition that ends up working for the next, say, 2-3 years, or even shorter term, that we could come back and actually put these things reoriented, I would say, with like new curb and gutter that extends into the roadway, and would be a much more permanent, installation. And in that case, we would remove those barriers. So yeah, it would, I would agree, they're not always the most attractive Jersey barriers, but they would be considered a short term. Right. I think there's a question here about permits for about parking. So permit parking, is there permits for business owners? And I actually don't know if there's a business owner specific permit parking system. Do you know, Sheila?
I have not heard of one from our parking group.
Yeah, that would be interesting, and that's a good question for us to follow up on. All right, this is a comment. It says, it sounds like some people don't realize this is an industrial area and that there needs to be understanding of the needs of the businesses.
No, I mean, I think we're certainly trying to emphasize that we're not looking to change the industrial nature of 4 Mile Run Drive. We're really trying to find a solution that works with the industrial needs and the needs of the businesses. But we are still responsible really for providing safe access for everyone who uses the street.
All right, the question here, I think this is related back to when I was measuring distances, is the question is Nelson the next street after Shirlington? If so, my previous question was about Shirlington to Nelson. Yeah, so I gave the measurements to both from Shirlington to Nelson and to Oxford. The next question in the list is, do you only read select questions? And the answer is no. I am reading every single thing that is coming in the chat and publishing it back out to you guys.
We do have a lot of questions and comments coming in on this block in particular. So if you asked that question because we thought we weren't getting to yours fast enough, it's just because we had a lot of comments and questions coming in.
Yeah, I'm sorry that question came in at 7:13 and I'm scrolling from the top down. Or do we answer just select comments? The answer is no. I'm reading everything that's coming in. All right, so a question here. Do you live in front of concrete barriers? How long is long term? This community has had hideous art buses in the park for 18 plus months, and that wasn't long term. We do have, you know, a CIP budget, and I don't know if you recall exactly, Sheila, when the funding for this is slated for the longer term improvements.
I think we were looking at longer term implementation kind of in 2025, 26.
I just looked at it.
Yeah.
So, so this project for 4 Mile Run Drive has a total CIP budget just under $10 million. The bulk of that money would come in FY25, so that would start in July 1 of 2024 and would carry through for the next 4 years after that. And it is to do exactly what we're saying, is to take the markings that are on the road from Shirlington all the way down to George Mason and making them permanent with new curb and gutter and drainage systems. So somewhere in that time frame is what I would say as temporary. I know 18 months does not seem like temporary. It would potentially be longer, as it takes time to design those things and move utilities and do new utilities to implement new drainage. All right. Same individual has said that the buses in the park were also temporary, not acceptable and ugly. All right. A question: if the major point of this project is to slow down traffic on the street, wouldn't it be quicker and less expensive to install more traffic lights?
Well, I think my first reaction to that is that installing new traffic signals is actually really expensive if we're building a totally new system or a totally new intersection of signals. But also it's just not the most efficient way to deal with speeding issues, especially on kind of shorter blocks like this. I don't remember what the distance is off the top of my head, but I know that our signals group has standards for how far apart traffic signals should be in order to move traffic efficiently. So on kind of shorter blocks like this, we do typically look to other design methods to, again, naturally slow people down.
Yeah, and you know, a signal is a traffic control device that is used for specific instances that generate it. I think mostly revolve around safety, but you know, there needs to be certain volumes on the main street and your side street to warrant it. And so it's very specific to how and when you would put a signal in, and we use the national standard, the MUTCD, which is an acronym, which is the Municipal Uniform Traffic Devices. That the word control is in there as well, but so we follow those, and it's kind of a uniform approach to implementing traffic controls, and so that it is the same standards here in Virginia, in Virginia, as it would be in Maryland, as it would be in Nevada, as it would be in any other state that is putting controls in, and that's so that drivers know what to expect when they're at certain traffic control devices. So as Sheila mentioned, a signal would not be needed just to control speed. All right, we have a comment here. It says, regarding parking, please consider the sheer number of employees of the businesses on this strip. We at 3870 have roughly 70 employees that report to work most days, and about 80 of them drive. They already have to park far away and walk to work, many of them women who are coming to work in the wee hours of the morning. If you meter the parking spaces, you are penalizing these hourly workers who are typically in lower income brackets. All right, another comment. It says the barriers in concept 2 would visually impair the ability of customers to find a business. Bollards would at least allow better sight lines for seeing pedestrians as well. I think we appreciate that comment as one of the negative sides of the barriers. All right, another comment says we're used to cheap fixes around here. Concrete barriers for years is hideous. And that years do not equal short term. Right. Many business customers are from out of the immediate and would need parking to access the businesses. Okay, I got it. All right, so it says customers are not from the immediate area and would need parking. Sorry. All right. Another comment says, what I'm hearing is that you are making changes that will impact the industrial community negatively. And that I'm not reading all of the comments, which I assure you I am.
And again, that comment was timestamped 7:19. It's currently 7:25. We are trying to move through these comments quickly. Someone is asking if we have a visual of between Oakland and Nelson. We're going to get to that in just a minute. I think in the interest of time, we're just going to wrap up these last couple of comments that are coming in.
Yeah. All right. So it says don't assume everyone understands the acronyms you're using. CIP. I know what it is, but not everyone else will. CIP is the Capital Improvement Program. It is basically like a funding plan that the county board adopts typically every 2 years, and it sets forth kind of our planning document for expenditure of large like capital funds for improvements in all different areas, transportation being one of the major ones. And so like our group, Sheila and I work in the capital projects for transportation, and we focus on complete streets. So like there's capital projects for transit to build bus stops, like transit stations and metro connections. We're solely about taking the existing infrastructure and trying to convert them to complete streets, which means looking at all the different modes of transportation and trying to balance them with the land use planning that is in the county currently. All right, another comment, it says, please do not put up concrete barriers if you don't have the money to do it properly. Don't do it at all. Another comment, physical barriers are the best way to protect pedestrians and cyclists from moving cars. As a resident and homeowner, I don't think they look ugly, and I think a pedestrian-friendly community looks better. I also think nothing looks worse than a car accident. All right, a question. Do you have an illustration for Oakland to Nelson that you are going to display?
That's coming right up.
All right. Do you want me to read just a few more of these and then we'll do that?
Yeah, I think one of the comments here is a repeat comment, so I'm just going to go ahead and publish that one. But we do have two other comments. One that says, this road has a massive, newly rebuilt and very popular park on it. We can live with the aesthetics of some concrete barriers for a few years so that kids can safely get to the park. Wouldn't want to live with the current unsafe situation until the county scrounges in the couch cushions for a capital project. And then the last two comments say, agree with the comment from 3870. It sounds like the county is not in tune with what is happening around here, and there's already a trail for bikes. As I mentioned earlier, we're certainly open to further discussions with business owners as we move to finalizing whatever concept we decide to move forward with. I'm going to go ahead and move to the block between Oakland and Nelson, since we did get a question about that already. I'm only showing one image for this block because it's more or less the same for both concepts. Because there's an existing sidewalk here on the south side that we don't feel like we need to rebuild or supplement with an asphalt walkway. We're really just using this block as a transition between the improvements that we did in front of Jenny Dean Park last year with the back and parking on the south side to what our consistent design is west of Oakland, with that back and parking shifting to the north side. So between Oakland and Nelson, and I apologize that part of this design is covered with a label for ABAC. We have one lane in each direction with a right turn lane going towards Nelson eastbound. There's some, the going westbound, the lane widens up to allow a little bit of space for buses to pull over to the curb at the existing bus stop. And then in the other direction going eastbound, the second lane is a space for buses to, again, pull over to the curb so that cars that are behind them can continue to go through. Because we did have a little bit of extra space up top, we went ahead and continued the parallel parking that's on the north side in front of Jenny Dean Park, and really just continued the design that we had up there until the existing curb bump out. I just explained both of these, so we can move right into discussion for this block. If folks have comments, please drop them into the chat box.
While we wait for questions or comments, I mean, certainly we appreciate the feedback on the barriers for different, reasons, and we're taking that all in. We're not, I don't want to let people come away from this meeting thinking that, we're going to implement something based on majority rules or comments that come in. But if you haven't spoke up today and you want to send it in the feedback later, that's great. But it's understood, that the barriers are, in most people's opinion, not attractive. There are trade-offs, pros and cons to all the different elements of this, and so we'll sort through and see, what fits best for this community, and we'll post that and the reasoning behind it on our website once we do get all of that feedback, and be very transparent about what was received and how we came to conclusions. So I think that thank you everybody for the comments. So there's a question here. Did anyone from the county speak with the Civic Association? They have a handle on what's happening. And I can take this really quickly, and the answer is yes. Actually, last night we met with the Civic Association and gave them this presentation and fielded questions. So we're not getting any new questions or comments right now. So maybe we'll give it a few more minutes and then maybe we'll wrap up. I know it's just a few minutes past what we said the meeting would go.
And I know I've said this a couple of times before, but just to reiterate, if folks think of questions that they didn't get to answer here or that just kind of occur to them as they're thinking or over the next couple of weeks, we'll have that feedback form open, and you can certainly reach out to us with your questions after this meeting as well.
All right, we did get a comment. It says 1,200 low-income residents regularly visit AFAC on Nelson on foot, by bus, and by car. Free time, limited parking, and safe, accessible pedestrian walkways are extremely important for our clients, volunteers, and staff. And we also have very large trucks accessing South Nelson Street. Safety and access for businesses are a priority. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Gonna give it about 30 more seconds for folks to drop any lingering comments or questions. All
right, so we do have a question. It says, any consideration for lowering the speed limit along 4 Mile Run east of Walter Reed due to the sheer number of businesses and the new park?
We haven't currently been discussing lowering the speed limit. Our focus again has really been knowing that people are already driving so far above the posted speed limit. It's bringing it down to what the legal limit is. I think if there is widespread support for lowering it, it would probably require a study before we could do anything, but it's something that we can pass along to our traffic teams.
Okay, we have a question. It says, when are you, the county, meeting with business owners to understand our current usage and needs?
Well, I have had a couple of phone calls or been corresponding directly with some of the business owners along the stretch, but clearly there are people that we haven't been able to speak to yet. So like I said, I'll be leaving my contact information, and you, of course, can feel free to reach out to me directly. I think there was a little bit of information lost between when the area plan was developed in 2018 and when we started working on this project. We're doing our best to reach everyone, but it's just taking a bit of time.
All right, we have a comment that says, many concerns about what has been presented. The county does not seem informed with this part of the community. All right, I think that hopefully we have worked, on this area and with some of the community in the past with the area plan, and as Sheila just mentioned, sometimes there is information drop over time because businesses come and go or things change, and I do think that having these meetings are very valuable so that we can learn if we're missing stakeholders, and I think it's clear to us perhaps we could do a bit more outreach with those directly impacted. This can be difficult. I give you just my experience with this area as I worked on the first implementation. Is we mailed thousands of postcards to all of the properties in the area and held a public meeting just like this. And out of like 4,000 mailers, postcards, when it came to the meeting, we had 12 attendees. And it is very difficult to get people energized about things, and sometimes until it's too late. And when we're really impacting individuals that we recognize to be in a harsh way, we do try to go above and beyond where we would want to go door to door and knock on that. And I know that we've had that attempt to date, and perhaps I think that we could do that a little bit more as this goes on. If indeed concept 2 is something that would be advanced, we realize that that would have a really tremendous impact on the businesses, and we don't want to have a negative impact on them. We want to work with them about what appropriate driveway entrances are needed and how site circulation would be able to continue. And as Sheila had mentioned at the top of the meeting, is that it is possible that we would have to delay this project until the spring and the repaving if option 2 were the direction that this was headed, just so that we would give ourselves more time to really work with those impacted businesses and the community. Right, we have another question here. It says, is there any way to decorate concrete barriers or otherwise make them more attractive? And I think the answer to that is yes. It has come up on another project. I know it is a bit difficult sometimes to mobilize artwork. I know it's possible, but we have not been discussing how that might happen. But if that were something, I think we would go to the Civic Association and see where that might lead us, and what would go on there would be a huge question. What is the speed limit out there today?
The current speed limit is 30 miles per hour.
All right. Looks like we have 3 comments. So I'll try and roll through these real quick. It says, I do not believe that one person who may or may not be a resident and seems to only care about industrial businesses is representative of the community. Many community members would be happy to see the industrial businesses entirely gone and the land they occupy replaces with park.
I just wanted to quickly respond to that. Sure. Just to reiterate, we're not trying to change the industrial character of this part of Arlington. We know that in general, industrial spaces in the county have been getting smaller and smaller, and we want to honor the industrial nature of it. Again, the intent is just to improve safety along the corridor for everyone.
Right. This comment is, there has been no dialogue here. The county does not know how to engage people. Maybe postcards are the wrong approach. Talk to the Civic Association. And I would just respond with, we have been in contact with the Civic Association in several instances and continue to do so, in addition to other forms of outreach that were mentioned at the top of the meeting. It says, comment here, there are roughly 100 businesses which deserve more than a postcard. All right. And then just a reminder that the PCI index suggests that the pavement is in above average shape and would not require repaving normally. This is a waste of public funding. So I think we can follow up with the need related to the PCI as part of our response period. All right, we got a question here. It says, which civic associations are you communicating with? Only Green Valley. They are not the only civic association impacted by this. I would say to date, yes, it has only been Green Valley, as that is where this is located. But we have given notice to the other presidents of the adjacent civic associations that the public meeting, like tonight, is occurring, and I don't really have a way to see who is here tonight, whether somebody from that civic association has attended or not. All right, well, we don't have any more questions or comments, and I know we've run past. You know, I'll let Sheila close it up as But I'll also just say thank you for everybody for attending tonight and providing the questions and comments. So to you, Sheila.
Yeah, so just to quickly wrap things up, the next step in the process is obviously choosing a preferred concept, and I think we heard a lot of comments about both concepts that we presented. We heard a wide range of opinions. So we'll work to finalize the design. Obviously, the timeline for the implementation sounds like it's still up in the air and is going to depend on additional coordination and how we choose to finalize the design. So we'll continue to provide updates to the civic associations, to the rest of the community, and we'll certainly post updates to our website as well for the general public. Really appreciate you guys spending your evening with us. I know Jason already mentioned that we are running a little bit over, so appreciate folks staying on the call to provide their thoughts. We will be posting this presentation online if you want to go back and take a closer look at some of the things we said here. We'll also have that feedback form available online if you want to give us additional questions or comments. And in that feedback form, there is going to be a link to the concept design illustrations. And as you can see here, the presentation, once it goes online, will contain links to some of that background information. So there's a link to more about the resurfacing project, about the Vision Zero data, and then kind of some background about the other data that we've collected in this neighborhood and on the 4 Mile Run area plan itself. So with that, I'll just thank you all one more time for attending. Please, my contact information is on the project website. I can add it to this last slide before we post it online as well. Please follow up with that feedback form or with me directly. And Jason and I are both just looking forward to rounding up all the feedback that we can and finalizing these designs and hopefully coming up with something that's safe and comfortable for everyone.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.